Excuse my slightly croaky voice if I'm a bit croaky. Sorry about the cold. Anyway, this webinar's about 1000 Discovery Drive, which is a fantastic new addition to the Cambridge Biomedical Campus. We're pleased to have Ed Hayden, a director of Scott Brownrigg, and Felicity Meares, who was the concept architect, on this presentation. You're going to hear an awful lot from them. We'll then have a series of questions and answers at the end if you wanted to ask anything specific. Obviously, we do ask for these Q&A sessions to be left at the end to allow Ed and Felicity to work through their presentation. Please feel free to use the Q&A chat part on the Zoom site, or raise your hand as necessary if you'd like to raise a question. A little bit about Ed, if I may. Ed, as I said, is a director of Scott Brownrigg. He leads a team of designers, architects, technicians. He's a big champion of zero carbon projects and design innovation across a number of sectors. But Ed will be well known to a few of you in Cambridge. He has a wealth of experience in commercial lab and science buildings, particularly in the Cambridge market, including those at the Science Park, ARM headquarters, at Peterhouse Technology Park, Cambridge International Technology Park, and many others. Flick, we're really pleased to have her here, considering she's actually still on maternity leave. But before she did go on maternity leave, she made sure that we managed to get planning consent for 1000 Discovery Drive. She's been with Scott Brownrigg since 2013. She's a very motivated architect. As I mentioned, she led the concept design. Big thank you, Flick, for taking your time out of your precious time to contribute to this webinar. So without much further ado, if I may hand over to Ed and Flick. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen now. Okay. One second. I should flick to the wrong slide. Okay, hopefully that's all visible. So we're going to take you through this. This is actually the part of the stage 3 report. So it really, we will run through this slide. It explains the project, some of the constraints and site issues, and then we go into a bit of detail. But please ask any questions via the web chat. Thank you. Okay, I think we all know where we are here. It's on the it's south of Cambridge, obviously, on the Biomedical Campus. And if we just click the next slide, you can see here it sits in relation to the new AstraZeneca building in the center of the image there. And we are adjacent to the ABCAM building, which is now complete. This is a slightly old photo, of course, and sits on what's known as phase 2 expansion of the biomedical campus. And it's the next building along, and we'll see how that whole phase 2 is going to be expanded in the future. And of course, beyond that, there's phase 3 eventually, which sits to the further south of that site. So here you can see the site location plan. The blue line being the extent of the phase 2 allocation, and then the red line is our planning boundary, or as was. And as you can see there, we've got ABCAM sitting next to our site, and the two plots sit very close to each other. And these photos, slightly old again, but show you the ABCAM building, which is really a lovely building. And if anyone gets a chance to have a look around it, it's a fascinating design. And so we're sitting adjacent to that, and I think it's worth just looking at the materiality of the ABCAM building in its context. And I think on the on the biomedical campus, there's a whole range of different styles and approaches to the architecture. The latest one being the AstraZeneca building, and I think it's worth seeing how this develops, especially in the phase 2 element, because the buildings are structured in a certain way that they read as really a kind of continuation or
a family of buildings.
Yeah, sitting within their own grouping, really. The site history, obviously, the history of the site was a greenfield site, and it was just agricultural land to the south of Cambridge prior to the development of the biomedical campus. It sits just within the flood zone 3, which is quite low risk of flooding, and further flood risk assessments being carried out by ACOM for the zone itself, and it's a very low risk area. But obviously, as we know, Cambridge is predominantly flat, especially in this part of town, so it's all of a similar level.
Yeah, it's essentially at the moment it's basically just grassland with very little sort of habitat, and the aim of the scheme will be to sort of dramatically increase the biodiversity on site and actually give back to the existing kind of character.
Interestingly enough, I think in the latest work we've been doing on biodiversity, we found that improved grassland actually has a higher rating than you may assume. So it means that you have to work quite hard to achieve an improvement on a site which is predominantly grassland, which we've had to do here. As I said, the building sits to the east of the ABCAM site and adjacent to it. So there's a certain amount of daylight and sunlight overshadowing, which happens in the latter part of the year, around this time of the year. But generally, we've got good exposure, which means 2 things really. One is we've had to think quite carefully about the facades of the building in terms of how they work to minimise the solar gain, but also we've got some good views, and it's quite an open site, so it's quite a nice place to be. And I think certainly if you go to the ABCAM building, you can see that the rooftop terrace is very nice for that.
As Ed's already mentioned, Cambridge is pretty flat. The site here is also quite flat, and the kind of existing levels down Discovery Drive, the road that separates ABCAM from this next plot, sort of the only one of the constraints we've got in terms of site levels is that road's already established and built. And that road will continue along the south of the site, so we just need to tie in with those existing levels.
This shows you the compliance study. So the outline planning permission for phase 2 had 2 studies undertaken for the potential development permitted by the parameter plans for the massing and quantum of general form of development. So compliance study 1 at the top shows this kind of, if you like, almost like a zipper kind of configuration of buildings where they're stepping in and out. And we did a lot of thinking about how we connect them up, whether we had an internal route running through, or how that would work. And then compliance study 2 shows courtyard type blocks, which are sitting in a similar configuration, but in a slightly they're bigger buildings, and that's more akin to what we're doing.
And in between the buildings, it was really important as part of the compliance study is that they're sort of green public realm spaces that dot from top to bottom. And that all the buildings along the north, so the upper buildings, can all be slightly higher than the ones on the south, as part of the parameter plan.
So this shows you the hybrid compliance study. The outline permission allowed for a hybrid approach. So we have 1000 Discovery Drive, which is more halfway between the 2 in terms of courtyard or the finger building. And it sits to the south of ABCAM, to the southwest of ABCAM, and then the future plot will be developed in similar to that. And there may be changes that come but predominantly that will be the form of development going forwards for the future kind of 7, well, plots 3 to 7.
So looking sort of in a bit more detail, some of the constraints and opportunities. The zone for development that we could actually build in is sort of outlined in the parameter plans. So we already know that the top bit along Dame Mary Way and the bottom along the landscape buffer, and that's the extent of our site. We already had this assumed logic that the next plot, so our plot for 1000 would sit to the south of the site. We've also got maximum building heights, which doesn't include the flue height. So for any science and lab building, the flue heights can be above and beyond this parameter height. And then we've also got to factor in a couple of 6-meter views in phase 2 that allows views from the Cambridge Biomedical Campus through to the landscaped sort of Cambridge countryside beyond, which is, I think, highlighted in that blue arrow, that we'd have a big 6-meter zone and make sure that they're provided. There's also a high pressure gas main that runs along the north of the site there in the orange dashed line. You can probably just about make out. There's a few constraints that limit us. There's also loads of opportunities. Ed's already mentioned it's a great place for views. We've got views out across the countryside. We're right next to Abcam. And there's just, it's a great place to sort of be located on the campus and to create this new family of buildings.
So we undertook a number of massing option studies from an early stage, and you can see them here. So we looked at the building having a U-shaped plan or a donut building or staggered H, and so each of these was examined for a number of factors. One is how it sits on site and sits with the parameter plans that we've got to work with. But also, and those compliance studies that we showed you earlier, but also there's quite a lot of consideration about what kind of building this is. And this is designed to be a multi-occupancy laboratory building. We've done one on the science park, which is a much smaller version, but this requires a lot of flexibility to be built in, which dictates quite a lot about the plan form. So we'll come on to that, but you'll see how that works. So the building became predominantly a square in plan, and then sits back from Abcam, so it doesn't obscure any views, but it also has its own freedom and views, and then creates this public space to the north of its building, which is off Discovery Drive.
Yeah, the sort of square plan form had, when we were looking at the studies, it had a really efficient, in terms of servicing layouts, as it's a spec office spec office and lab building, the service runs needed to be optimized, the facade needed to be optimized, and this really became sort of an efficient kind of optimized layout that allowed us to achieve everything else. Like the complexity of the building is almost on the inside with all the different tenancy options and service runs we can have, so it helped to keep the actual building form quite simple.
I think when you compare that plan to, say, the Abcam building is a building of 2 halves, really. It has, on one side, it has the laboratory space, and on the other side, it has the office space. Well, obviously, if you're doing a flexible multi-occupancy building, those two things integrate and can flow from one to the other, or merge and change. Mm-hmm. So you can't really do the same kind of H-shaped plan for a building of this nature.
So in terms of site layout, we've got the building to the south of the plot, and then we were very much working the sort of landscape and public realm to the north that allowed, we were sort of guided by key routes, key vistas, the way people approach the site, the way we want to use the site with the sun path, where do people want to eat lunch? We needed to fit all the bicycle stands and really make this like a public realm that people want to stay and enjoy, place where people can work outside. Discovery Drive, Discovery Drive along Abcam has got sort of a planted tree-lined boulevard, so we're also going to mirror that so that Discovery Drive becomes a tree-lined boulevard and a great sort of approach as that road's the key road that will access the whole of phase 2 in the future. And then we've got a diagonal route across from Addenbrooke's and the rest of CBC that comes directly to the sort of the front door, which is that blue star, the front door of 1000.
And that's informed the layout of the site, but also the plan form and how we've dealt with the entrance way and how we've made a feature of it. So quite an important feature. So you can see that actually on this plan now. So the entrance is in the top left corner and is dictated by that diagonal route, which makes quite a dynamic form of entrance. And then I think, if you want to talk through the plan and how it works.
Sure. So this at the arrival space, we've created a central piece that we'll come on to later. And then we have, as this is a shared multi-occupancy building, there's a cafe, there's a co-working space and reception all on the ground floor as you enter into the building, which has got some double height to create sort of a nice atmosphere. Then the building itself has a central core that serves all 5 floors and then 2 side cores for escape routes. We've put all the plant we can on roof, but there is a bit of plant, the heavy stuff on the ground floor, as well as sort of changing rooms, showers and everything for cyclists and runners. And then we've just optimized and maximized all the lettable space where we can. On the ground floor, for instance, this is located on the south of the building so that they still get those views out to the countryside and the landscaping beyond.
So building tenancy has a flexibility in the way the building subdivides. And so you can split it two different ways effectively. This shows you a double tenancy layout, and this is really referring to what I was talking about the difference in plan form between this and say ABCAM. So you have a splittable front and back tenancy, and each of those tenancies obviously has to have its own stair access. It also has to have a number of other features in this kind of building, which is access to its own plant space, its own plant riser space, and risers for the flues, extract flues and everything, so I have to run through that space. So that's that kind of shows you kind of tenancy split option 1. And this building is to a shell and core. So it's not dictated at day 1 about how it's split or how it's divided. And then you have the second option of tenancies where you could split it into 4 tenancies per floor. And so when you split into 4 tenancies per floor, each one of those has got to have its own dedicated on-floor plant space, its own dedicated risers, extracts, and all it have to have equal accessibility to the core, and so to the things like the goods lift.
One of the most complicated bits was that even if the floor plate is split into 4 tenancies, each tenant needs to be able to access their risers on every floor throughout the building, hence why such a simple plan actually enabled us to sort of address all the complications internally and make sure that the building works functionally for all the tenant options we could end up with.
One of the design features is the entrance space. So yeah, you've got a shared communal entrance area. Of course, that means that if you've got a multi-tenancy building, it's hard to have you can't have an open atrium running through it because of privacy issues and that kind of thing. So you would have a glazed-in atrium. So it's better probably just to have a generous 2-story entrance zone rather than trying to just have a glazed kind of corridor running, a vertical riser running through the space. And then one of the key features is the structural design of the supporting above the entrance, and we went for this this kind of structural tree theme. We tried various options out at the time, and we quite like that. As the building's cut away, and it has this kind of growth of this tree from the middle, which is quite nice touch. And you can see it there. So that shows you that diagonal form coming in, the entrance feature of the tree, and that kind of transparency cutaway form. So it's kind of like a cube of despite taken out of it.
So the envelope itself, again, needs to respond to quite a lot of the opportunities and constraints on site. There's a lot of, as Ed mentioned, we do get a lot of solar gain as the site's quite exposed. And we wanted something quite dynamic that responded to the sun angles on different sides of the building, as well as sort of privacy in getting the views out, privacy in, and making sure that we've got a really high performing envelope, particularly where we needed it to prevent too much solar gain and prevent the building overheating and all the kind of energy associated with cooling and heating the building, and how the facade could help us do this with passive design rather than energy.
So we also thought it was important in this building particularly to form a dialogue with the ABCAM building next door. There's, the ABCAM sits on its own at the moment in science in the biomedical campus, and we thought that particularly for this whole phase 2 development, it'd be good if there was a language of, if you like, a cousin of the ABCAM building in terms of its materiality. So we've used similar materials and similar themes of these vertical elements which have shading fins on them, deep reveals, and then we're using the brick around at the back to the side, which is actually south facing, so it has less glazing.
Yeah.
So the front of the building is actually north facing, so it is more transparent and permeable and ethereal, if you like. And then around the back, it's much more solid and grounded, and that really reflects some of the materiality on the ABCAM building. Yeah. I think here you can see a side elevation, and you can see that change of materiality over the side of the building. So on the left here, we have it going towards the front and the entranceway, and we have this light glassy facade with this perforated aluminium and shading features. Really, that's about filtering light and creating a really nice piece of architecture. And then to the right-hand side, which is actually towards the south and the more exposed side of the building, it becomes more solid. It has this bricky texture. Yeah,
some deep window reveals to create some shading, and a similar kind of color palette and material palette to ABCAM next door. Simple elevations. Obviously, the top one shows ABCAM on the right-hand side. This is a much taller building, so it allowed us to play with kind of the rhythm and the proportions of the fins and the brickwork to create something really elegant. And then the next plot can be taller again. So that's how we or Liberty work with that in the future. Maybe it has a similar language again.
And it's worth just noting on this elevation, you see the flue tower, which is quite a feature, up to 8 meters tall, and centrally located in the plan. So to minimize visual impact from the ground, you won't really see it from the ground unless you're a long way back. But yeah, I mean, these kind of buildings do have these flue towers, and they're an undeniable feature that you have to incorporate it carefully into the design.
Yeah, so it appears quite apparent there on the elevation, but actually from street level, unless you're sort of stood back by Adam Brooks, you'll never see it. So this is one of our quite early renders, pre-planning, which shows the aluminium fins with the perforation patterns wrapping around that northern elevation to create that sort of focal entrance space. And then it does have, it's a lab building. It has a lot of plants. The whole of the roof space up at the top there's completely full of plant equipment, screened by louvers at top level. There's also this building to allow flexibility, future adaptability, and of course we actually don't know who the tenants are to start with. We've designed in quite a clever facade that allows us essentially a random but controlled array of louvers on every tenancy to allow kind of soft spots where future tenants can plug and play, and without having to smash up the facade every time that they want to do some work or change a layout, they can plug into the existing louvers on the facade.
And I think multi-tenanted, multi-floored lab buildings have this dilemma where you can you have to put in your plant riser space and your central flue extracts, which are landlord controlled and landlord supplied, but also you want to allow flexibility for every tenant to do what, to have that ability to change and adapt. And so they have to have the ability built into the design to connect plants to the facade to bring air in and extract. So.
In terms of the perforation design, this is sort of ongoing, but we really want this to sort of symbolize and represent what the building's all about, this kind of heart of collaboration, co-working. It's a place where ideas of all these mini tenants can kind of come together, fertilize ideas, and really, grow and become an exciting place to work.
And we've taken some. This shows you some of the reference images from the materiality around. On the left there, we've got the Abcam building, which has this dark brick and this kind of champagne or gold coloured cladding, which we're using those references. In the middle there, we've got a photo from our ARM building, which also used this idea of perforated fins and shading blades, which on that particular project referenced the technology behind the silicon chip in a silicon wafer. So we've taken those references again and applied them in a slightly different way to the architecture of this building. So it's a growing, a growing dialogue of between architecture and the science that it's supporting.
A few, these are sort of the wider range elevations taken from the compliance studies and the outline consent in terms of height. In context to Addenbrooke's, it's actually quite low. Addenbrooke's then sort of grows up higher, but we are on that landscape. We are on the boundary of CBC and phase 2 is on the boundary of kind of the built up area and the landscape beyond. Although since this was developed, phase 3 is coming forward, but currently we are on that boundary. So it's that idea of it stepping down towards the landscape. So we are lower than Addenbrooke's. In terms of section, the orange lines you can hopefully just about make out dictating our sort of max building heights and flue heights, obviously, which are higher. We've got, obviously it can be lab or office. So we've designed 4.5 meter floor to floor heights, exposed ceilings throughout, as Ed mentioned, it's shell and core. So tenants can choose to fit out things as they go.
So this is this building, there's two ways of thinking about these type of buildings. They can either be lab-enabled office buildings, in other words, office buildings which allow for conversion to laboratory space, where you'd have about 4.1 meters floor to floor. And that's what we've done a lot of that work on the science park. And some of them are labs, some of them are offices in their tenanted fit-out form. But this is much more a lab-ready building, which is designed to be lab from first principles. And that means that you would have 50% also lab, 50% office, and it's designed, to be that flexible laboratory space from day one. Once again, just looking at the high comparison there between Abcam and the new building, and you can see that. I think it's interesting. Just looking at those floor-to-floor heights. If you look at Abcam, it's got its office space on the left and the lab space on the right, and the floor-to-floor heights are different on both of those. Whereas, of course, this has one floor-to-floor height running throughout.
That top view also gives you an idea of even just stood in the public realm of 1,000, you can never see the flue tower. It's sort of due to perspective, it's actually not visible.
Tucked away. This really talks about the tenant. This is a key design aspect, really, of this type of building. As Flick said, you have to design it so that every tenant on every floor has their own tenanted, their own space for tenant plant space, and that exists on the roof, but also on each floor.
Yeah, we also factored in. So the purple shows obviously tenant plant space, and there's special areas where tenants can put their plant within their demise, and there's also sort of soft spots in the facade and the floor where they can also add in like high value equipment and have extra equipment, where if it's an office, it's just given over to office space, but then if it's a lab tenant, they can take over that space these purple areas
Yeah,
next to the side cores,
Yeah.
and they can add additional plant. And then there's also the soft spots in the facade we mentioned where they can plug and play.
Which are indicated by those arrows.
Yeah. So this is a bit more on the adaptive facade strategy with the sort of random array of louvers to make sure that we don't end up with something that looks terrible when they've had to retrofit. It's all about allowing the flexibility from day one for just optimizing, making their lives easy for the services.
This is quite good. I mean, this just shows you this type of building, an entire floor at the top is given over to plant space. So in orange, you can see the all of the extract risers coming up for the fume covered extracts, coming up and gathering together into that central flue space. And they run over the top of all of the air handling equipment. And of course, the air handling level is far higher in this building than it would be on a standard office building. So, you know, you end up with an entire floor of plant. And then with some small areas for tenant plant space. And then obviously the whole roof is then covered in PVs as well. So
it's really been sort of really great working everyone. So Hawley and Ramble working in 3D here to kind of collaborate and ensure that everything fits, particularly within the height constraints that we have on the site, and really sort of knitting together all those services to make sure everything's everything can fit on the roof basically, because it's super tight.
Yeah.
Looking at the
looking at the wider stuff. I mean, this just shows you how the building works in terms of its vehicle access. I mean, one of the important things about these buildings is that they are lab buildings, so they require laboratory offloading. They require space for gas deliveries, all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And this building had a nice view to the south, so we didn't want to lose the south side of the building for plant and
loading bays
and everything. So the loading bay is located on the east of the building, and that also means it's not facing into the back of Abcam either. So quite limited and quite constrained about how you deal with the building itself. Limited car parking on the site. There's a temporary car park going up next door to serve it, but yeah, that will eventually be gone and replaced.
Long term, the multi-story car park you can just about make out on the bottom left will be built to accommodate sort of Abcam 1000, and then the sort of tipping point is when the next plot comes forward. All those cars will then park at the multi-story car park to sort of make sure that the phase 2 is pedestrian friendly. It's all about the landscape and the public realm and the buildings within it. So it sort of cleans up the site from a sort of sea of parking as they used to be on the science parks. Also, with this being like multi-tenanted, up to sort of 20 tenants in the building, obviously there could be a turnover, every time one of those tenants refits. It was really important that there's like a lay-by that can accommodate tenant fit out deliveries and things, which is all located on the east there. Obviously, we have got a limited amount of blue badge parking for disabled users in the front of the building, close to the entrance, accommodated knitted sort of into the landscaping. And then the rest of it's sort of in a temporary car park on the right-hand side there.
We won't skip over this one. Yeah, tracking.
To ensure it all works.
Cycle parking supply. Obviously, this is Cambridge, so cycle parking strategy is highly important. We got nearly 200 cycle spaces and secured spaces, and that's served at the front of the building. So we feel that it's important that this is a highly cycle-enabled building, as any building in Cambridge needs to be now. And so that's out front and centre and isn't something we have tucked away. And alongside that, we have the refuse pavilion,
which is probably slightly bigger than it would be for other buildings because it's lab. You've got all your gas stores, the ring main units, and other bits.
Yeah.
So in terms of sustainability, along with the phase 2 outline planning, it has to comply with a bespoke sustainability strategy and is also targeting BREEAM Excellent. The building itself, I think we've mentioned a few of the bits in terms of making it super sustainable, obviously optimizing the facade, and the building itself in the form that we chose to make it sort of really compact and efficient. And also this sort of inherent flexible design that the building can be adapted and accommodate multiple tenancies, like, you know, for the foreseeable future, rather than having to demolish the building to start again, or do too much like large alterations to the building. Hopefully it's designed quite loose fit so that it can accommodate a whole range of office lab tenants for the foreseeable future. Yeah,
so I think really that brings us to the end of the presentation. I think we've covered everything, so we're happy to answer any questions you may have. I think it's going to be an interesting new building for Cambridge because of the flexibility it allows, and that's that kind of incubator space and multiple tenancy spaces is in high demand in Cambridge. We've built one in the Science Park, and that was for Tuss Park, and that has proved to be very successful, having full tenancy over the entirety of the pandemic. And so, yeah, I think this space is going to be very popular. So.
Thanks, Alison. If you're still there, hopefully you can run through any questions because we haven't got the chat open.
Well, the good news is I have. Thanks ever so much, Ed and Flick. That was really great. Obviously, I'm a bit privileged because I know quite a bit about the scheme anyway, but I hope the participants found that informative. We've got a few questions coming through. The first one we've got is what low energy carbon initiatives did the project embrace? You touched on some of these. Were they client driven or planning driven?
Both really, yeah. I mean, laboratory buildings are by their very nature a more difficult, a more challenging building to make a low carbon. So you've got a number of challenges. You've got the low carbon in construction, and the nature of this building is that it needs to be a concrete framed building. You have to consider low carbon concrete and replacement, and you can get quite far with that. We would generally be pressing to use timber wherever possible. It's just not an applicable material in this context. For the frame and structure, I think there are examples of timber laboratory buildings. GSK built one at Nottingham, but multi-tenanted, multi-storied lab-ready buildings. It's a tough challenge, and I think it's a challenge we all are going to face going forward. In terms of energy use during operation, that's more, we all know a lot more about that, and it's an easier thing to deal with. But still, these buildings have a huge air change rates. You know, they are again challenging for energy consumption in operation, I'd say.
It's also all electric, so there's no sort of gas and electric scheme with and we're trying to do as much renewable as we can on site.
Yeah.
Brilliant. I've got another question here. This one I'm not sure whether you'll be able to answer, so I've sought a little bit of specialist help, possibly. But I'll let you have a go. Why does the flue have to be as tall as it is?
Oh, it's a percentage of the.
Yeah.
Forgive me because I'm on maternity leave, so I haven't been in depth in this project for a while. But it's a percentage of the height of the building. Yeah. It has to be a certain height, so it's a calculated
25%.
There we go.
It's a 25%, notional 25% of the height of the building, up to 8 meters, and then you do dispersion modelling. So if you had a very, very tall building, your flue height wouldn't have to be 25% more. You do your dispersion modelling to work out how that gases are being dispersed. But yeah, it's quite a specialist subject, and there are other ways and means. There are active flues, which are lower, and use a kind of jet effect to disperse, but they are noisy. So there's balances on these things.
I think on 1000 here it's like 6.8 meters or something. So it's still below the 8 meters, but it's a calculated height.
Yeah, it's essentially set by British Standard, which Ed's contributed to, Ed Lucas. So just so you're aware, I saw that one come up. I thought you might need a bit of extra help. There's another question here. Will the structural frame support bridge link to an adjoining building?
There's no plans at the minute to link to an adjoining building because the next plot 3, there's a few options on the scheme, but it's not sort of, there's not one tenant taking all these buildings at the moment. It's very much this plot's come forward and then the next plot's sort of not associated to it yet. They're not built by the same, they're not built for one tenant that need linking, but in the future, the next sort of few plots could possibly be linked. We look at options for that.
Sure, brilliant. Got another one here. Are the future lab tenants becoming more demanding in your view with respect to sustainability credentials of the buildings that they occupy?
I think that's definitely true. I think increasingly people want their lab buildings to cater for every need and also have all the sustainable credentials alongside. And I think yeah, it is quite a challenging area. These are the most, I'd say, almost the most challenging buildings to make sustainable. We've done a lot of low carbon buildings in this office, and yeah, this typology of building is one of the tougher ones to deal with. So you've got things like when you talk about the frame, you've got things like vibration and loading issues. So timber is a difficult sell. And it's quite hard to see how you can do it without turning it into forester columns or having beams so deep that you can't, the building has to be twice as high. So we tend to try and think creatively about how we can address it. And I think going forward, I think you're going to see a lot of hybridization of the building form. So steel and timber hybrids are quite common now, but I think you'll see other versions of this. A concrete and timber hybrid spaces. Maybe, you know, if you're allocating office space, if you're separating office space from lab space, it's not so hard because you can make your office space a timber form, and your lab space maybe concrete, and you can hybridize it that way. But yeah, I think it's a very interesting and area to be working. You know, I think you're going to see a lot of innovation in the laboratory development side of things coming forward, and we are, you know, we're pushing it as hard as we can.
Great. Thanks, Ed. One more question. There's a few more actually. Could you elaborate on what the delivery time frame is, the construction start? Flick, I know you've been off, so I'm going to jump in on this one.
Yeah, do jump in. Yeah. I can make a guess.
Planned start date is mid-March this year. And the original program we were working on 70 weeks delivery, but that is in terms of working with the preferred contractor, we're looking to improve on that 70-week delivery. Let's quickly pick up another one. Did the planners impose any biodiversity improvement targets as part of the scheme?
Yes. I don't know if you know the percentage, Alison. I can't. It was definitely positive.
15 to 20.
Yeah, I was going to say 15% improvement target was what I had in my head, but I can't remember the exact figure. But yes, and we've had to work really hard with the landscape architects to achieve that and really make and like weave it into the landscaping to make this kind of amazing public realm that also offers the net biodiversity gain that we want to achieve.
I mean, generally, with these type of buildings, when they're office buildings, you would cover the roof in a green or brown roof, you know, make a You get biodiversity gain that way. But of course, with laboratory space, with the roof predominantly given over to plant, it's very hard to do that. So we have looked at biosolar roofs, which are a combination of solar panels over brown roofs, effectively. But yeah, it's quite tight on these buildings, so the landscape has to work very hard.
Yeah, there's some great landscaping actually as part of the design overall, isn't it? It leads me on to my own question really, is about, I guess, how much attention was paid not just to the inside of the building, but also to the outside of the building. It's a topic that's becoming a lot more relevant, I think, in terms of the scientific community, is about that outdoor space. So did you want to talk a bit more about that?
Sure. So I think over 50% of the site is landscape public realm. So the building, they almost, it's, as much thought needs to go into the outside as the inside, because it is so much of the site. And we went forward. We made several iterations of the design. We started as architects looking at how there's desire lines and how people are going to approach the building, and rather than design something on paper, we really thought about how people are going to use the space. Working really tightly with the landscape architects to kind of develop something that referenced ABCAM. So it's quite a lot of what's successful at ABCAM we've drawn through to our site, and then we've also sort of enhanced it with something that works well with the buildings. It's very much. I
think also this is a theme of development of the of science space. I mean, historically the science parks were a sea of cars with buildings kind of dotted in the middle of a plot. Each plot was a sea of cars surrounding a building. And they weren't, you didn't really approach them in any other way except by a car. And now we're seeing suddenly with this site and developments along in the science park, a transformation of that from into becoming much more walkable communities, much more inhabited landscapes. The cars are getting shoved to the periphery, hidden away, and reduced in their impact. So with sustainable forms of transport supplanting them. So I think that's a common theme you'll see. So even the older developments, even the older science parks, are transforming over time towards much more walkable, livable community space. And I think that's a really good thing.
And yeah, it was considered right from the outset, even looking at those staggered blocks, where's the public realm going to be, and how does it relate to the other buildings surrounding it, and how it's going to interact, already thinking about how it connects to the next plot along. So it's been sort of very considered.
Sure, no, I agree. Next one here is a little bit more on the sort of specialist side, and I haven't been able to get an answer on this from our third-party source, but would heating and cooling be a problem in the double height space? There's quite a lot of glazing, so potential heating losses. I know there was an awful lot of modelling done, that's all I would say.
It's wonderful heating. It's wonderful heating.
Yeah, the double height space is it's literally as you walk in the main entrance, and it's realistically quite a small double height space. As I've mentioned, you can't really have a massive atrium in this kind of building because of the multi-tenancy. So it's actually quite a small amount that the double height covers.
And we have the advantage in a way that the building faces north, and that corner is a very unexposed corner. So really, in a lot of these buildings, heating's less of an issue. These buildings will almost automatically heat themselves, and in fact, you have to be careful they don't overheat because of if you look at the Letty standards and you apply Letty standards to this type of building, you'll find you head towards an overheating issue. The insulation levels become so good that the building can't lose heat, and then you spend more energy cooling the building than you should do. And so I think in particular that corner, because it faces north, we don't have the solar overheating issue that we may have otherwise. So, it works out very well in that regard.
Yeah. And the thermal modelling has been carried out by the engineers, so should be all good.
Absolutely, yeah. Another one really around the sort of attracting tenants and their expectations. It was mentioned about the well building standard. Was this covered in the brief? And if not, do you think this sort of accreditation is probably going to become more prevalent on future plots and future schemes?
It's obviously something that's harder to do with a speculative building than it is with a tenanted building. If you've got a tenanted building, I mean, a lot of the well building standard comes down to provision of services, food, beverage offers, and, you know, having great water and all of those other things. And a lot of that stuff is you don't have that in your initial building as developed, and so it's part of the way the building is managed and run. So yeah, I think increasingly, you know, these buildings were once seen as, you know, kind of back a house, laboratory space, who cares? And increasingly that's transforming into, you know, attracting the best, providing the best services and facilities, and well building, sustainability are all part of that, aren't they? So
yeah, in terms of all the view, we've got views sort of, there's a lot of good, you know, we've really tried to optimize those views. We do have, and the landscaping outside, and that's all kind of, you could occupy, you know, there's working spaces outside with furniture layouts and setups that can accommodate all of that kind of thing, and food and beverage on ground floor. So we've, you know, there's elements of it there, because it's that shell and core, it's hard to achieve from day one.
Yeah, but there are a number, I think it was fair to say, just to sort of help and sort of in terms of what's been looked at since planning, there's been a number of tenant areas of improvement within the actual facility and outside that are being considered, really just for that tenant enhancement, which plays completely to the well standard. So in a way, we're giving it an awful lot of lip service, aren't we, on the project?
Yeah, it's all, I think the framework's all there. It's just
yeah, absolutely. I think that's it on questions now. What I think I ought to apologise for is just saying that this was the last presentation of this year. There is actually another one that's planned next Tuesday. Sorry, Simon, the details of the question have disappeared off my screen for some reason or other. I wonder whether you could just jump in.
Yes,
sorry.
It's the Utopia building, which is the Cambridge University refit of the old GPO building on St Andrew Street. So it's a refurbishment project. So that's next Tuesday. I think details haven't quite been released yet because we're still sorting out the final bits and pieces of that. So that should be next Tuesday. So watch out for your email invites. Yeah.
Great. I'd just like to say thanks ever so much again to Ed and to Flick, particularly Flick for taking up her precious time again. But I thought that was great. You know, it's clearly a fantastic addition to the campus. There's a lot of thought that's gone into it to make it talk back to the wider campus, and in particular, obviously picking up on the threads of the initial plot on ABCAM and how that then develops on in terms of this one and future plots. So I think if it's all right with everybody, unless anyone else has got any more questions, I'll just give it another couple of seconds. But hopefully everybody enjoyed that. I'm sure Ed and Flick would be more than happy to take up any future questions separately if that was needed. But I think without further ado, hopefully everybody has a little bit more time for about 5 minutes worth of lunch, and we'll see everybody soon. Thanks everybody for joining, and see everyone again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.